The 2024 presidential election is November of this year. As someone who's thinking about potentially buying or selling a home, what's with the shakes? As someone who is potentially thinking about buying or selling a home, you're probably curious about what effect, if any, elections have on the housing market. It's a great question because buying or selling a home is a major decision, and it's natural to wonder how such a major event might impact your plans. I'm Keri White, real estate agent and co-owner of Human Element Real Estate. Today's video, we are going to give you the exact data on how elections impact real estate. Historically, presidential elections have only had a small temporary impact on the housing market. This is exactly what's happened to home prices, sales, and mortgage rates throughout history during election time periods. For home sales, during the month of November, in years when the presidential election takes place, there's typically a slight slowdown in home sales. As Ali Wolf, chief economist of Zonda, explains, usually home sales are unchanged compared to a non-election year, with the exception being in just the month of November. In an election year, November is slower than normal. And this is mostly because some people feel uncertain and hesitant about making big decisions during such a pivotal time. Of course, clearly we understand that. However, it's important to know this slowdown is actually temporary. Historically, home sales bounce back in December and continue to rise in the following months and year. In fact, data from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, and the National Association of Realtors, NAR, shows after 9 of the last presidential elections, home sales went up the next year, which you can see from this graph below. The graph shows annual home sales going back to 1978. Each year with a presidential election is noted in blue. The year immediately after each election is green if existing home sales rose that year. You'll see the green if they rose. The 2 orange bars represent the only years when home sales decreased after an election, and that was 1981 and 1989. I was born after one of those years and before one of those years, side note. Is that surprising to you at all? Not when I was born. Home prices. By the way, if you're enjoying this content, comment below, share it with a friend, because I'm sure it'd be helpful for them to hear, because everybody wants to know what's going on with home prices and the elections. Speaking of home prices, do they generally drop? During election years? Not typically. As residential appraiser and housing analyst Ryan Lindquist puts it, an election year doesn't alter the price trend that is already happening in the market. Home prices are pretty resilient. They generally rise year over year regardless of elections. So very little impact. The latest data from NAR shows after 7 of the last 8 presidential elections, home prices increased the following year. See this graph below, similar to the amount of home sales. Just like the previous graph, this shows election years in blue. The only year when prices declined after an election is in orange, which was 2009. And that was during the housing market crash, which is far from a typical year. Today's market is different than it was back then. All the green bars represent when prices rose the following year. So if you're worried about your home losing value because of an election, you can rest easy knowing prices rise after most presidential elections. Mortgage rates are important because they affect how much your monthly payment will be, of course. So when you're buying a home, you want to focus on your interest rates. And looking at the last 11 presidential election years, data from Freddie Mac shows mortgage rates decrease from July to November in 8 of them. See the chart. Most forecasts expect mortgage rates to ease slightly throughout the remainder of the year. If they're right, this year will follow the trend of declining rates leading up to most previous elections. And if you're looking to buy a home in the coming months, this could be good news, as lower rates mean lower monthly payments. So if you're shopping for a house, shopping so fun, keep your eyes open during November. And don't get swept up in thinking the election will impact the place you love to call home. So what does this really mean for you? While presidential elections do have some impact on the housing market, the effects are usually small and temporary. Historically, the housing market doesn't tend to look very different in presidential election years compared to other years. That's the bottom line. For most buyers and sellers out there, the elections don't have a major impact on their plans. While it's natural to feel a little bit uncertain during an election year, history shows the housing market remains strong and resilient. For help navigating the market election year or not, let's connect. We encourage buyers looking during this time to buy, as they may not see prices or rates like this starting in 2025. And by the way, waiting doesn't ever serve you, because timing the market is impossible, or I think we'd all be billionaires, right? Buying and selling is always about your personal time frame and finances. We are actively working with home buyers and sellers, and we'd love to connect with you personally on your particular and unique situation. This is Keri White at Human Element Real Estate, and we will see you next week.